right. I believe we are live. Welcome back, everyone, to Speak in My Piece, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Jazz Times. My name is Louis Marks. I am here at the sanctified halls of Rope-a-Dope, enjoying time with all this wonderful music. First, I want to tell you about our host, guitarist Dekel Bor. He's performed with many of the greats, jazz legends Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Metheny, Billy Hart, and more. His recent release, Let Love Rule, is out this year and is available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. Today we have the great pleasure of connecting with Antonio Sánchez, the great Antonio Sánchez, drummer, best known for work with Pat Metheny, but also known for the film score for Birdman, which earned him a nomination for a Golden Globe, a BAFTA Award for Best Film Music, and the Critics' Choice Movie Award for Best Score. He's got a new album out. They're going to talk about that today, coming out on Whirlwind Records. And I want to mention that he was a student of the great Danilo Perez, who we had here on the show. So thank you for listening. Thanks to Jazz Times for hosting us. I'm going to switch things over and drop in on Dekel Bor in Berlin.
Louis? Of the first time I heard Antonio, I think that's something that a lot of people share. And it was actually with Danilo's trio in Tel Aviv with Carlos and Enriquez. Probably we're talking about at least 22, 23 years ago. Antonio was part of that amazing band that's not as well recorded as I wish it was. And we kind of kept in touch. I saw him when I just moved to New York. He was playing with everyone and everyone, and just got the gig with Pat Metheny, and that was kind of a game changer for many of us, as they went on for a string of albums that are kind of genre defying in many ways. We're gonna speak to many of his experiences with various legends, but first and foremost, Antonio, it's so great to see you. How are you? Thanks for
Good.
coming.
How you doing, Dekel?
It's been a while. It's good
It's
to
been
see
a while, indeed. Definitely not since Tel Aviv 23 years ago, but
There you go.
but it's been a while.
So you have an album that just came out last week, Trio Grande.
Yeah.
Fantastic album.
It's
So
thank you, man.
I'm
It's
opening a
cool
bottle to
because,
your new album. It's evening in Berlin.
oh yeah, well, salud, Prost.
There you go. So it's an amazing album, and you guys please check it out. So this has been quite a year. How did you guys spend all this free time?
Well, it's it's been quite a year, like you said it. We're trying to do our thing. It's an interesting combination between trying to disconnect, trying to stay relevant, trying to connect and be, on social media, showing your stuff, but then trying to stay away from social media because it's too much. But mainly staying creative, trying to, at least, because it's not easy. I've realized that a lot of the creative energy that musicians have, or artists, or human beings, um, is comes from stimuli. Going to see an amazing art piece, or an art collection in a museum, going to see a great concert, going to the movies, going to hang out with people.
Yeah.
We don't have those things, so the inspiration has been very elusive. So been kind of trying to force myself to do things, but it has not been easy, as I guess it has not for most people.
I also think that a lot of people don't talk about it as often, but when people come to see us play, they don't realize we also come to meet them, to see them, to feel them. I mean, as musicians, and being in the studio or being off stage for this long, it's a challenging situation for a creative musician, because I'm realizing there's just so much we're getting from. Like, we've been rehearsing in my studio here with my trio in Berlin, but it's really not happening. I mean,
You
We
can't
did,
replicate it.
yeah.
You just can't, and I've realized that for us, a lot of musicians, we are kind of crazy. So the moment where we get on stage and we're able to just do what we do for 2 hours without thinking about anything else and just putting our heart and soul and our body 150% into this activity in front of people, which is also a communion kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then for us is a meditative activity, because it really clears your mind of everything else. If you're doing it right, you should not be thinking almost at all about anything, just letting the music flow through you. And that's incredibly cleansing. And I think that's the thing that I miss the most, because like you say, I can practice all day and I'm never gonna get the same effect. That I'm committed to this thing because people are there, people paid hopefully good money to see us, and we are indebted to the audience, and we want to do a good job. So we not having that makes it feel like we're in a pressure cooker where the pressure is building and we have no relief.
No release, yeah.
It's
But
horrible.
it's not just the fact that people are there, but we did a couple of like live streams for scholars and places like that, and it's the same. We're the same band, and we're basically playing to a camera lens, and that was eerie to say the least. But I think in your case, I mean, you're in a couple of the bands that are probably the hardest working bands in jazz, both Migration and the Pat Metheny projects. I mean, when you guys go out, you're out a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
so this is
Yeah.
probably the first time you're home since you're 17.
Oh yeah. I mean, as a matter of fact, we were in the middle of a tour when this happened. We got stuck in Argentina. We were doing an amazing. It was going to be an amazing South American tour. That Pat hadn't been there since the '90s, and I had never been to South America with him. So for me, it was going to be incredible to play in Brazil. We had played in Brazil, but we were going to play in Argentina, in Chile, in Peru, in Mexico, in Cuba. I mean, it was just going to be just a
Yeah.
marvelous tour. And we got stuck in Argentina when everything started happening. Everything got canceled. It took us a couple of days to be able to get back home. And when we got back home, all hell broke loose. But at that moment, we all thought, "Oh, cool, we're gonna have a month off," and,
Exactly.
and then we're gonna
Exactly.
go back
Exactly. I
right.
remember that time.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just been something that we'll never forget as long as we live, for sure.
So let me ask you a different question about the same topic. With all this free time on your hand, could you name a couple of albums that you've been listening to as a fan that kind of kept you inspired?
Yeah, I discovered this one just a few days ago, but I've been really into it. It's by an incredible African singer, Omu Sangare.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's called Acoustic. I mean, everything she does is it's amazing, but this one is just really beautiful, and it's also very hypnotic, but with a lot of variations and a lot of meat, and that has been beautiful, and some classical music. I always go back to classical music. I love Debussy. I was listening.
I don't think a lot of people notice about you, but you were a classical music major. I mean, I remember you studying classical percussion, classical piano, and composition. Some.
Well, I mean, not really classical percussion. I was not. I was never really into classical percussion because you don't get to play that much. So I was studying classical piano. That was my major,
Yes, I
and then
remember, yeah.
started also composing. But back then, I was already playing drums. I started playing drums when I was 5, and I had my rock band. So I had like this Clark Kent Superman kind of thing where one group of people had no idea that I did this other thing. You
And
know
you were also flying in gymnastics in between or something like that. I remember some story.
exactly. So yeah, at the same time I was doing gymnastics. I was in the junior national team in Mexico. So I was like flying all over the place, literally between my rock bands and practicing, and then in the conservatory studying classical music, and then in the afternoon I would do gymnastics like for 4 to 6 hours every day. So it was a very intense time right before I went to Berkeley in 1993. But yeah, the classical music thing at the time, I didn't see how it was gonna be able to apply to what I do now. And now I realize how helpful it was to analyze classical composers, to look at their charts, at their scores, and analyze the forms, the motivic development, all that stuff that is basically storytelling. You know, that's the main thing. How can you tell a story? How can you make it clear? How can you make it accessible? How can you make it interesting? And people like Mozart, like Beethoven, Bach, I mean, they could develop one thing over five movements,
Yeah.
And when you start realizing what they're doing and how they're twisting it around and turning it around, then you realize you can also do that in jazz. You can do that in any kind of music, because all of the things that we know as form, melody, all that stuff, comes from way back, and we have been transforming it as we go along.
But I also think, just as someone that really knows your thing, is that you have a very unique way of developing the music as a drummer in a band over a really long, a really long stretch, which is probably, it's I mean it's a perfect combination with the way that Pat writes, but I think you also have a very unique way of always putting melody first. I mean, when you're playing, I can always hear you taking the melody somewhere, and then
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I started, I was not always playing that way, believe me. When I got to Berkeley and when I was fresh from Mexico, I was just, I had chops, I had no concept whatsoever, and I was just destroying the music of a bunch of bands that I was playing with, it took me some hard hits and some really harsh criticism from good teachers that I had at Berkeley to realize that there was much more to playing than just having chops and having lots of technique and being flashy. So when I started.
what's the gap between what you're talking about now to the band with David and Edsel Gomez and Hans? And I mean, because that's already sounding like an incredible band, and you're already
Well,
had your
let's see,
sound on
I
it.
got to Berkeley in 93, and I started playing with Danilo and Paquito de Rivera in 97. So by the time I got to, that's exactly when I graduated from Berkeley. Right at that moment, I feel like I was ready to be taught in the big leagues. I was not by any means part of the big leagues, but I had enough knowledge, and I was humble enough and hungry enough that I could be taught, and I had already worked a lot on my craft so that I could get in the stream of the river pretty quickly. But Danilo, he was probably the person that kicked my ass the hardest in the
In what
beginning,
way?
because well, we were playing trio, and my first big gig was with Paquito de Rivera, playing in the United Nation Orchestra, which is the orchestra that Gillespie left vacant basically when he died in 1994, and Paquito took it over. So that was a great experience because it was a big band, but we had to play every style you could imagine, from swing to samba to Afro-Cuban to joropo from Venezuela, tango, milonga, second line. I mean, it was like a showcase of different styles, and everybody in the band was from a different country, and it was a great thing for me to realize that my stylistic knowledge was pretty happening, because I worked on that a lot when I was at Berkeley. But when I started playing with Danilo and we really started getting into uh, the the way to interact in that context, which is listening really, really intensely to everything that is happening and either choosing to react or not react to every little thing that is going on. I was not used to that. I was not used to playing at that level of intensity and focus. So I remember the first times we play, I mean, Danilo would be just looking at me and throwing stuff at me all night long. He would just not look anywhere else except for in my direction. And I was like, oh my God, there's just so much information coming at me. And I was not trained to react that quickly. So that was the way he kicked my ass for a number of months. And then little by little, I started kind of getting used to the intensity and the focus. But the first gigs we did, I would always end up with a headache because I had no idea how to do it or what to play, my choices. Everything just didn't sound right to me, and it sounded like the music was always ahead of me, and I was just trying to catch up. So playing with him for a couple, like 2 or 3 years, that was an amazing training to really be super focused in the moment and not be able to think about anything else.
I remember I went to a couple of the gigs, and I remember you played with unbelievable fire, super, super quiet, which I don't think people realize that it's so hard to do on any instrument.
Yeah.
But on the drums, I'm assuming that's 100 times harder on drums to play that way.
Yeah, and that was another thing because I had been playing a lot of fusion, and Latin jazz, which usually play pretty loud with a big drums. And then I started playing straight ahead. But to be able to play in a piano trio in some church in Italy with no amplification, that was incredibly challenging. And there were not even my drums. There were drums from that little town that were from 1950 with heads from 1950. So everything was challenging about
Vintage in all the wrong ways.
exactly. I mean, it was a very challenging experience, and I realized if I don't play soft, I cannot hear what's going on, and I needed to hear what was going on because Danilo was very, very, adamant about us interacting, as deeply as possible. So I kind of had to train myself to be able to play that soft and with intensity, but it was very, very hard. It was a very productive but intense time, the late 90s for me.
And the David Sanchez band came around the same time.
Yeah, well, I remember I started playing with Danilo and we played a lot. And then he went on tour with John Patitucci and Roy Haynes in the summer of '98. And David needed a drummer that summer, and then Danilo recommended me, and I started playing with David. So for a while, I was playing with Danilo, with David, with Paquito, but we were playing all the time. Both of those bands were working constantly. So it was
Yeah,
a very, very, it was great schooling for me around then.
there's a couple albums that you're on. Perhaps even three. That two of them have been very influential on me. Melaza and the one before that has the black cover. I mean, the incredible albums that are not as often talked about nowadays, I think, but are real. It was a real band and the incredible band sound and composition were amazing, and the way you guys played, and I think it really carried on. I mean, you kept a very strong relationship with all those guys for 20 something years. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it was it was a really cool community, and also Miguel Senon, who I went to Berkeley with, and I was already playing with. He was already doing his thing, and then he joined David's band. And for a while, we had two saxophone, bass, drums, and percussion ensemble, and that was fantastic because it was super open, incredibly jazzy, but with all the roots from the Afro-Caribbean tradition, and it was just a very cool thing to be a part of because we really were getting into some very, very deep places. And at the same time I was also playing trio with Danilo, so it was just you know couldn't ask couldn't have asked for a better school around then.
so one day you're playing with Danilo and Pat hears you, and the next thing the phone rings. How does something like that happen?
Basically, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the
I have
short.
my phone right there. It's not ringing anytime. There's crickets here.
I mean, what happened was I was on tour with Danilo. We were in Italy, in Torino, and we knew we were going to be closing for Pat's trio because Pat doesn't like closing usually. So he was going to open with his trio with Larry Grenadier and Bill Stewart, and then we were going to play after him, and we were playing trio with Carlitos Enriquez. So back then, I was experimenting with different sounds on my kit. So I had the regular jazz kit, but I had a flat timbale instead of the second tom. I had a pair of bongos. I had a conga. I had a bunch of cowbells. I had a cowbell on my left foot. I was doing all this independence things where I was, playing a clavin 5/4 while I was playing the bongos with one, and it was so much fun for me to play that gig like that because it was also very challenging, but it was completely rooted in jazz. The way we were interacting was all bebop, jazz, but we were playing all these crazy rhythms on top of it. So,
I think that many people like me had that moment of listening to you and thinking, this cannot be, this cannot be, happening in real time. There's too many parts.
well, funny you should mention that because that's exactly what happened with Pat. So the story goes that we started playing, and Pat was having dinner backstage. It was an open air stage, so he was just backstage. He could hear everything we were doing, and then the promoter, who later told me the story, Antonello Vitale, he asked Pat, "So what do you think about these guys? Do you like it?" And Pat was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. They sound great, but especially the way the percussion and the drums hook up is pretty amazing." And then Antonello told him, "No, but this is just a trio. There's only three guys." And then he stood up and went to the side of the stage and started checking me out. So that was the first time I kind of made an impression on him. And then that same tour, we were in London playing at the Pizza Express, and then Pat was also in London playing at the Barbican Center. So after his gig, he came to our gig and checked out our second set. I didn't even know he was there, and I got off the stage, and he was there, and he's like, "Hey, man," I'm like, "Oh, hey," you know, and we talked for a while. We exchanged emails, and then when I got back home, I had an email waiting for me, really really detailed about everything he had liked, everything he thought about the gig, what he thought about my playing. It was very moving for me. It's like I was like, wow, this is Pat Metheny writing to me all these things, and then at the end it said, and if you want to play, what about next Thursday? Do you want to jam? And yes. So I met him in his studio where it used to be on Times Square, and I just brought my cymbals, and there was an old drum set from Jack DeJohnette just sitting there, and I put my cymbals, and we just started playing duo, and we played like for 4.5 hours. He recorded the whole thing. We started playing. I remember we played "Turnaround" by Ornette Coleman. Uh, that was the first thing we played. And then from there we started playing All the Things You Are, a bunch of standards, and then he started playing some of the material from the group. And I didn't know that that's what he had in mind. He was looking to make a change in the personnel of the Pat Metheny group. And he told me, I think you could be a good candidate because you come more from straight 8-note playing more than swing, because of where you come from and the music you've been playing, but the jazz language as well. So the way we play at the Pat Metheny group is we play, in the bebop tradition, except that we don't play any bebop at all. So it was maybe a few months that he was kind of checking me out. I would go and hang with him, play some more. I would invite a bass player. We
I
would play
heard from
more.
a couple of bass players that they played with you guys, and they would say that the playing was just out of this world. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, it was just so loose and so relaxed, and it was just fun. We were just playing, and then one day he called me, and Lyle Mays, rest in peace. We miss Lyle so much, and Steve Rodby was there, and then we played some of the tunes from the Metheny group with sequences with a computer just to see how well I could do that as well. And then he kept me guessing for a couple more months. I was going crazy because I was so close and I could taste it. This thing that was going to change my life
yeah,
completely.
absolutely.
It was not confirmed. So I remember one time we were again playing duo, and I asked him, "So, man, have you been thinking about the thing?"
I need to know where this is going.
Exactly. And he said, "Oh yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot." And that's it.
That's it, huh?
Yeah. So he tortured me for a little bit, and then a couple of weeks later, he called me, and I went to the rehearsal space, and he said, "Look, I think you could be the guy. So if you won the gig, it's yours." And I was like, "Man, thank you.
Unbelievable.
This is."
So I'm thinking that about a year later, I'm at the Beacon with my friends. We come to see you backstage. Your mom was there. I mean, I think it was the first tour of the
Speaking of now.
now. I mean, the entire city of New York was kind of there to root for you. I remember everyone was there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it has to be in a magical moment. I mean,
Yeah, it was crazy because I had been playing halls, jazz clubs, but at that point still the Pat Metheny group was big, and they had a huge production. It was kind of like a rock production with a crew and lights and this huge PA, and I was just like amazed to be in the middle of all that stuff with people that I've been hearing for years and records and seen videos of them. So to be in part of that at that moment was just an unforgettable experience. And also my mom was there,
yeah,
uh,
I remember that.
which she also had been hearing me playing for years, but in little jazz clubs and all the different situations, and to see that, she was blown away as well.
So what is it? What do you need to switch in your mind in order to play with from a small club in Torino with Danilo, with no PA, to playing all those 5,000, 8,000 people a night? I mean, what does it what does it need from a drummer?
Well, it was, playing in a trio, it was kind of like driving a Porsche. And then playing with this band was like kind of driving a train, where I was responsible for all these things that were happening. We were playing to sequences, and I had to kind of make it all come together. But also, keeping it with the lightness of jazz and bebop at the same time, but with rock volume. So that was one of the hardest things for me, because I had been playing in very soft situations, and I was used to having very light touch, and all of a sudden we were playing very, very, very loud. I mean, Pat had 10 monitors just for himself, 10 monitors. So, and he was right next to me. So to be able to kind of come up to that level of intensity acoustically, it was very hard. And when you play rock, you're playing in chongo chiko back chiko chong, but here we're playing in chong chiko chiko back chiko ding 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 ding. The right cymbal playing is just nonstop. And I remember the first 2 weeks of that first tour, uh, Pat wanted to try pretty much everything we had in the repertoire that we had ready, and we were playing 3 hours and 45 minutes. Those gigs were 3 hours and 40. By the time we got to the Beacon Theater at the end of the US tour, we were down to 3 hours, 3 hours 15, I think. But the first 2 weeks, I had to have a talk with Pat, and I said, "Man, I don't know if I can if I can keep doing this, because I'm in pain. And also, I did not know how to pace myself at that moment, because it was such a different experience for me. The adrenaline that was building up in me every night was kind of out of control. So I was hurting myself, and I was overplaying in terms of volume, and I was very stressed out. I was enjoying the situation, but I was stressed out that I was not feeling comfortable in this unit that had been playing for so many decades. So, and also Pat had a lot to say about what I was playing. He would give me, a list of instructions every night, because these are tunes that they have been playing for a long time. The new stuff, I was kind of I was myself, But the old stuff, I was just trying to replicate what they had been doing, and my touch was so different that everything sounded weird to them. So it was an adjustment period that was kind of a pain in the ass, I have to say, because I was like, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm
And this
trying to
is
do my
this is the
best.
Speaking of Now tour.
Speaking of now, yeah, I mean, after playing with Paul Vertigo for so long, and then Danny Gottlieb before that, they got used to Paul Vertigo's sound and feel and everything, and then all of a sudden, I come into the band, and it's like night and day. I mean, I'm not saying better or worse; it's just different. My touch was completely different. So it took them a while also to get comfortable with me, and it took a while for me to get comfortable with them.
So by the time I heard you guys after this was the Way Up tour, and the Way Up tour is a very very different situation than what you're portraying right now. Way Up tour, the whole first piece of the album is built around your playing. I mean, this is you leading everything, and it sounds like he composed that to your playing.
He did actually.
Huh?
He did. We Not many people know this, but before they composed, we went into the studio and they had me record tons of different grooves in different fields, different tempos, and then a lot of the initial demos they had were completely written to what I had played.
Unbelievable.
You know.
Wow, cool. That has to be quite the compliment.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It was.
so
Uh,
so when I see you, everything is already built around you. The album sounds has an Antonio Sánchez sound to it. You're playing, you're pacing everything, and it seems like it's kind of unbelievable the way you're pacing the band, you're pushing the band. When it's quiet, it's quiet. Someone is throwing bass guitars, you throw it back in the air. You're playing this with your foot. There's going to be a thing up there. I mean, it's kind of like by then you're like the magician of the group. Then
I
I
mean,
mean,
it was kind of hysterical because we recorded it and we recorded it in pieces, obviously, because we saw the music pretty much the first day of recording. It took us a week to do the basic tracks, but we were recording it in pieces. And then when we
and
were gonna,
everything was written out. I mean, the whole thing.
yeah, pretty much. Of course, Pat would never give me a drum chart. He would always give me a lead sheet, and then I had to, make a composite of, what the bass is doing, what the melody is doing, what to catch, what to not catch, and it's always, that's the drummer's job, to make everything feel round and nice and choose, what things are important of what's going on musically in the moment. So. Then what happened was like we recorded it. When we finally had the recording, we all listened to it like crazy to learn it, because we were not going to be able to read anything on stage. It was going to be crazy. So we were all learning it, but when we were learning it, we were also learning each other's solos and stuff. So when we get to the first rehearsal, all of a sudden, I know that the piano cue is this phrase that he played on the record, but obviously is not the same phrase when he plays it live. And then, we all realize that we kind of know this, but we really don't know it that well. And also the choreography of what, especially Kung Fu, Gregoire Marais, and Nando Lauria, which is the three guys that were behind the rhythm section. They were playing guitars, basses,
Yeah,
percussion,
marimba. Yeah, the
harmonica,
whole thing.
trumpet. I mean, it was really funny because at some point I looked at them and they looked like the Three Stooges, like kind of bumping into each other because they couldn't,
I
remember.
dropped the maraca, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Man,
it was hilarious.
that was one of the most incredible performances that I've probably ever seen. To see you guys do that piece, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah.
But Antonio, I can
One,
go about this.
one funny thing that is just that I, was always so concentrated on my playing. I knew everybody was playing incredible, but I never saw them playing, because I was doing my thing. And then when I saw the DVD, I was blown away. Like, oh my God, this is what happens every night,
Yeah,
and
the DVD is
it was
amazing.
just an incredible tour. Yeah.
The DVD is out as well. I can go about, listen, I'm a guitarist. I can go about this all day and all night. But I want to talk to you about some other things. Has to be one of my favorite albums of the decade. This is I, everybody's watching this know this album already. It's called Speakin. It's been out for for a couple of years, I think. I'm a huge fan of your thing in general. I mean, the first album, Migration, and then the live at the Standard, and live in the Sand. The entire band Migration has kind of shown the way you developed to this unbelievable voice of a composer.
Thank you.
It's really an unbelievable band, and I'm kind of itching to see you guys live because I'm hearing you guys are like an incredible experience. But in the midst of all of that, and that has to be a lot to do just to get that whole thing going. You basically got together with some of my heroes and most, the incredible figures of our, lifetime, and you found a way to compose music that sound like your voice, coupled to the, I don't want to say guest because it's almost sound like it's a band. I mean, your hookup with Melda is unbelievable for a few reasons. I mean, the first is you guys have just, some people in jazz, like, I don't know, Jim Hall. Their greatness is their greatness, but you guys have this agility of mind that is just so quick and so well suited for each other. Not very different than what you had with Brecker. I mean, it just seems like a very, very natural fit, but as opposed to the thing that you have with Brecker or with Korea, you guys, everything is legato, everything is singing, and you really, the way you wrote for the way he plays is really kind of unbelievable. So anything you want to talk about those bands it's a trio with Lovano and Patitucci, is a trio with McBride that you've been touring, for years with Pat, and Schofield, which brings a whole new sound to your thing as a rhythm section. And it's your guy, Brewer and Meltdown. So what was the experience like?
Well, around that time, I was about to put out a record with Migration, was called the Meridian Suite, which I kind of wanted to make my version of The Way Up, a through composed thing that lasted the whole record, where I would be able to tell a story over an hour instead of little stories that lasted 8 to 10 minutes. So that was a great experience, and that took a lot out of me to write that music and to be playing it and rehearsing it. I was also having some health issues at the time. I had some weird pains in my back that would not allow me to sleep more than a couple hours at night, and I was just a wreck for a while. And but I had this thing.
I always thought that someone in your shape that comes with, I thought that the shapeness come with perfect health. I mean, you're kind of ruining a myth for me.
Well, the thing is, because I did gymnastics for so long, I really messed my body up in many ways, because gymnastics is probably the worst thing you can do to your
I
body
didn't know this.
if you do it 4 to 6 hours a day. If you do it a little bit, it's not that bad. But I had back problems. I have ankle problems, all my fingers. I mean, all kinds of problems. But the thing is, I was about to undertake 3x3, and I was having all this issues at the same time, and I was like, man, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I was like, man, it's going to be such an incredible experience that I just really want to go ahead with it. So the idea behind it was that I wanted to call on some of my idols that I haven't been able to play so much over the years. I had played with Schofield a little bit. I had played with Lovano, with Charlie Hayden a little bit.
Right. The Sun project.
Yeah, exactly. With Schofield, I did a couple of things with Gary.
I would assume that if I'm putting you and Schofield in a room, you guys are just cracking jokes. There's no playing.
Yeah, so,
and McBride, that's the end of the story.
Oh yeah, well, imagine, like you said, with Christian, I have been playing quite a bit, but I thought, man, if I could get Christian and Sco, which are two of the grooviest people and musicians on the planet, I think that's going to be something very interesting to do. And then Lovano and Patitucci, which are two of the most soulful cats on the planet that have huge sounds, and the Italian thing is like
right there. You were going to say that.
Yeah, and then Matt is, like you say, is my guy. He had been playing with Migration for a long time, and he's one of the baddest bass players on the planet. And Brad was always somebody that I wanted to play with, and it had been eluding us. there had been chances, but I hadn't been able to make it. He hadn't been able to make it. Blah blah blah. So I said, man, I really wanna play with him and put something on tape. So the idea was to have two original tunes for each trio, and for me to arrange one standard.
Standard, yeah.
That's why it was going to be three times, three trios, and then three tunes
Tunes, yeah.
each. So I think the first one I started arranging was Nardis for Brad and Matt, which, I had this old arrangement of Nardis that was in a slow seven. And it always, it was cool to play sometimes, but not always. So I started kind of working off of that. I sped it up and I was like, oh man, this is so much, nicer to for me at least to play in this tempo. And then I wrote a pretty complex tune for the piano, which is called Constellations.
Constellations, yeah. I
First
love it.
tune of the record. And when I proposed this to everybody, I said, what I would like to do is write some simple material so that we can go in the studio. We don't need to rehearse. We can just hit and not worry about anything. And it was kind of true for most of for the three trios except for Brad's part of the project, because Constellation was very involved. It had tons of sections and a very fast melody. And I remember I sent him the chart, and he was like, "Dude, you said it was gonna be easy, And I said, "Man, don't worry. We're gonna do it in parts. Whatever is comfortable." So when we got into the studio, okay, let's do the head first, and let's do the solos a couple of times, and then I kind of pieced it together. But it didn't matter because we really got the spirit and the personality of the
Yeah.
and Nardis was also a blast to record, and yeah, the hookup with Brad, it was just so effortless. I had been listening to him for a long time, just like I had been listening to everybody else. So I kind of felt like I had been playing with them, even though it was our first time
And
playing.
that's a beautiful thing to for you to
Oh,
say,
it's
really.
it's really amazing, and Matt is such a supportive bass player that it was just heaven, musical heaven, and it was very quick. We had fun. It was not stressful. The three sessions were very fun. With Sko, I wanted to write something that sounded almost like Sko wrote it.
It
You know?
completely does. Yes.
Yeah, so he's got such a specific thing, a specific sound that I was like, man, I wanna exploit a little bit of that, and I wrote this tune called Nooks and Crannies, which is in 5/4, and he just both Christian and Sko just completely destroyed it, obviously.
I usually ask the guest about albums that shaped them, but with you, I basically anything I will ask is people that you work with. So it doesn't really apply in your case. But I was going to bring this up because I think Scofield's writing. I think both this was a huge influence for me, and also Loud Jazz.
Yeah, Loud Jazz was one of my favorites.
And I really think that you captured, I mean, his thing in the most beautiful way.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just such a different experience to write with those guys in mind, because you can write music, all day. I can write for Migration. When I write for Migration, I have everybody's sound and abilities in mind. So it was really cool to be able to write for, man, I'm going to write something that Schofield's going to play, and Christian, I'm going to write something that Brad is going to play, that was something that Lovano and Poritucci are going to play. So I was able to channel their, at least in my point of view, their personalities, and just bring stuff that was going to be not too complex, but that everybody was going to be able to imprint their signature sound on.
I think it's an amazing album. It's already been too well advertised, but we're giving one away, courtesy of Cam Jazz. So anyone who's sharing the episode, it's an amazing album. It's a chance for you to get it, but get it regardless. And I think it's also in a line of projects that you release, like the Live at the Standard or the first Migration album, that really showcase. I mean, there's something about being in the moment that I think it's a big thing of who you are. I mean, you have a very, very, very strong presence of everything you're playing. I feel like you're playing it for the first time, which I think is amazing. And it really comes out on this album. So I want to ask you about some other albums.
Sure.
So the first that I want to get to, I'm going to try to paste this. So let's talk about these two. You work with Chick Corea a lot. I want to talk about these two albums. The trio is because I mean, you're one of the only guys that he chose to record trio with for Dr. Joe. And Light as a Feather, I think this is an album that all of us kind of grew up on.
Right.
And I think that I hear a lot of correlation with your band, even if it's the instrumentation, the way that the way you manage composing and improvisation, but also you have this unbelievable forward motion to your playing that I always admired, that I think is very unique. Everything feels it's not on top, but it's always moving forward. And anything you want to say about that would be beautiful.
Well, actually, that's been one of the things that I've been fighting the most my whole life
I'll
is
take it away. Don't just send it my way. I'll take it.
I'm just gonna level with you, man. Because we all have tendencies, right? So some people play behind, some people play on top. Sometimes it makes me uncomfortable when I hear how the amount of forward motion that I put sometimes on the music, and I have to consciously try to pull back constantly, and where I get to a point where it's acceptable to me. But my tendency is to just push, 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 and it's always been a struggle for me, to be able to put it right where I think it should be, more than where it goes naturally. So that's been something that I still working on, nowadays, to place the beats in the right places, where.
That's unbelievable. I mean, what does rhythm or time or feel look like from spending 40 years on stage to when you just started playing drums with your rock band as a 5-year-old? I mean, what seems different and what seems the same?
Well, that's always been, like I said, a kind of a problem for me. Even when I used to play in my rock bands, like John Bonham was one of my favorite rock drummers, is one of my favorite rock drummers, and he is so laid back. There's so much air in between his notes. I was never able to do that naturally. I would be able to do it if I really thought about it, and I made adjustments, but it's not something that happened whenever I would sit down and play. So it was
think
something
it
that I had
also
to
has
think
to
about.
do with a generational thing. Uh,
Could be.
I got to play a lot with Charlie Persip and with Billy Hart, and their beat. I mean, it's like I can go to lunch between the hits,
Yeah.
and I have to just take my playing and kind of put it on the right symbol. Otherwise, this will never work. And it's not natural in any way. I think it's also if we consider the way that the world is moving so much faster now. I mean, hopefully we are part of our own generation in the best way.
Yeah.
But to be honest, as a listener, as a fan, to listen to music that you're playing on, I can just it takes you places. I mean, it's amazing to hear that you have a thing with it, but as a fan, that's kind of priceless.
Well, thank you. I mean, one of the things that I always want to make sure happens is that something happens. I just hate uh, gigs where it's just kind of flat. I really like drama. I like peaks and valleys. I like the element of surprise. So as a drummer, you have a lot of power over the band, and I like to exploit those qualities that the drum set has, where you can shape the music in many many different ways in a heartbeat. In terms of volume, intensity, dynamics, all those things are things that I'm constantly trying to maneuver around to get the most juice, the most drama out of any piece of music. Especially if you're playing live, and you have an audience in front of you, and the adrenaline is flowing, and you also want the adrenaline to flow through the audience as well. So I want those elements to always be present whenever it is that I'm playing, and I think whoever wants me to play with them are aware that those things are going to happen. A little bit of unexpected stuff.
Hopefully. So, um, I remember there was a minute in New York where I was playing a lot with Boris Kozlov and with Adam Rogers, and they came back from a tour with you and Brecker in Japan.
Hmm.
And there's a DVD that's running around,
Right.
and I think I watched it over and over for like 3 years, just only that. It's kind of out of this world. It's you and Sadownik and Boris and Adam is there, and I think Gil is on the gig.
Gil Goldstein. Yeah, sure.
And then there's there's the rest of the mini big band orchestra that he has.
Quinn
And
Dexter.
it sounds, it's unbelievable. I mean, the album is unbelievable, but to hear you guys stretching live, it's
Yeah,
out of
live
this
is
world.
great, man. And you know, same thing. Brecker, I have been listening to him for years and years and years since I was in Mexico. So to all of a sudden be playing, and that sound is coming from across the room.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
has to be
and you're
unbelievable.
interacting, and then all of a sudden you play something, and then he reacts. It's like mind blowing, you know, after having listened to somebody and being so influenced by a sound for so long. So one of the greatest things that ever happened with Brecker was that he really started enjoying playing duo with me.
Brexterity, I think Brexterity opens with you guys.
Exactly. Exactly. But we were doing that, you know, in a few different tunes, and sometimes, you know, it would get so crazy our interaction that you know he
Wow.
would laugh or I would laugh or the audience would laugh because he said, "Man, I feel like you're in my head," you know, and same thing with me. So to be able to play just duo drums with a saxophone player like Michael Brecker is like, you know, Train and Elvin, you know, it's like that communion between drums and saxophone is something that doesn't happen with just any other instrument. So to be able to have done that with him on a nightly basis was just like, you know, I will never forget that.
So my last question, really, or my second to last, if I talk about Chick or Brecker, or I think I brought both of these. I mean, both of the group and the trio, and I mean, these are really Danilo. These are really the greatest improvising legends of our time. Also, Chris Potter, Donnie McCaslin, a lot of guys that you work with. Miguel. I mean, brilliant virtuosos.
Mhm.
If what and what when you take all of that, what do you take from these situations? I mean, how does that shape you to play with these kind of legends?
You know, the main thing that really happened in my psyche and in my playing and in my personality was to realize the importance of storytelling, uh, to realize the importance of building, you know, words into sentences, and then sentences into paragraphs, and then paragraphs into pages, and then pages into a story, you know. So I'm a big fan of movies. I'm a little bit of a film buff, so to be able to kind of compare how you would improvise, you know, as if you were comparing it to a movie or a book, you know, how are they shaping the story? How is the editing? How is the peaks and the valleys of the story? Because you could have a great story and then completely tell it the wrong way. So you can have a decent story, but if you tell it the right way, it can be absolutely thrilling. So I think what I learned the most from all of these incredible musicians that you just mentioned, that I try to apply now as a drummer and as a composer, is that, you know, storytelling, to engage the audience in a way that is going to be reachable. Is I don't never want to leave the audience behind. Like, I'm gonna play my thing, and you know, if you guys like it, fine. If not, screw you. You know, that to me is something that jazz musicians, certain jazz musicians, tend to do. I think, like, I'm so amazing that you must understand what I'm doing. And I think one of the greatest things that I learned from Pat was that even if he had really complex music, he would throw the audience a rope, and that would usually be the melody. You know, you could be singing a melody that is in 17/4 and not know that is in 17/4
Yeah.
because it's just a beautifully crafted piece of music, and the melody is very clear. So I always try to apply that to my playing, to my writing, to not leave the audience behind, to make it accessible, but not make it dumb, not to dumb it down, not to underestimate the audience, saying, "Oh, these people are not going to understand what I do unless I make it dumb." I know people have the capacity to go with you on whatever trip you are trying to bring them into, but you have to, give them a life vest to go with you and get head first into the water with you. So I think that's the main thing that I've learned from most of these incredible musicians.
Ah, this is- wow, this is amazing to hear. Antonio, man, I'm so happy to do this with you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh man, my pleasure.
And stay safe. And I can't wait to see you in the real world when this is over. I
I
mean,
know, man.
enough of this.
By the way, how is it going in Berlin with all this stuff?
I don't really know, to be honest, because all I see is my home and my studio. And I'm working on like a couple albums at the same time. And I'm doing an album of Bach, and then I'm doing an album with a trio. So I in these kind of situations I tend to drown myself in work.
Yeah.
Just not to be a stress ball 24/7 and drive everyone in the house crazy. But
Smart man.
no, but to be, to be a little on a serious note, I think this year has been an incredible reminder how life-saving music can be. I mean, everybody's kind of bitching and moaning that we don't get any royalties and there's no this and there's no that. But if I just go back to how amazing of a phenomenon music is, the fact that I can listen to it, what I'm getting from it, and it's really unbelievable. And I'm learning this all over again. And the fact that I can take a guitar and pluck it and the things come out. I mean, it's kind of miraculous.
Right.
And I think this year is kind of readjusted in how much I should not take this for granted.
Right.
But I hate being home for this long.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Not take things for granted, and also kind of be kind to yourself. Also, when you're in a bad spot and you are not creative and nothing's coming out, it's also understandable, and we shouldn't be too harsh on ourselves if these amazing pieces of music are not coming out at the moment. Probably
That's
there's going to
amazing
be a
for me to hear from
renaissance.
you.
I think there's going to be a renaissance, artistic renaissance after this period,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to what we're going to be seeing a year from now.
It's funny for me to hear you say this because I always, you always been kind of a big brother for me and a huge role model. And I always saw you as this monstrous professional that just shows up with no practice and just blows the entire arena down. So to see you, I mean, at the same time, we didn't get to it today. We might have to do a volume 2, but you composed, you won an Oscar for your compositions. You're doing a couple of TV shows on the side. You're doing Migration, which is an incredible band that everybody kind of knows about now. I mean, it's amazing to see the humility you bring to it.
Oh well, it's always a struggle, but we try our best. That's the thing.
Antonio, it's great to see you. Stay safe, and
You too, man.
I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.